Everybody in Kenya and beyond believes that the group that has been hit worst by the virus manenos are the low-income group, the less privileged in society. Now, although it is true that this most vulnerable group of Kenyans have been very, very badly affected by the effects, especially the economic and financial effects of the virus, the truth is, the worst hit, the most devastated group are Kenya's middle class. Now, there's a very easy way of understanding this very clearly, because the truth is, there are very many people who still don't see. Let us look at it this way. You are already poor. You are already struggling. You are already going hungry sometimes. Now what has happened after the virus came is that you now struggle more. You go hungry more. But of course there's the advantage that the NGOs and those who offer food aid are focused on your group. But things are very different with the middle class, because they've been enjoying a certain standard of life. Good car, good job, good income, and a good life. Then all of a sudden, when the virus comes, life changes very drastically. Suddenly, you start worrying about things you never used to worry about, like food. Actually, it can be summarized in one simple sentence. They no longer have an income. And no longer having an income in the middle class has its very terrible consequences. Now, the popular classic 105, Maina, Kageni, Kingangi, etc., covered this in a recent morning show. And they probably expected a lot of calls to come in. But the middle class in Kenya does not operate like that. One thing you must understand is that as far as the middle class is concerned, appearances are extremely important. Indeed, I dare say, appearances for the middle class are a matter of life and death. It is not enough to drive a car. It is more important what kind of car you're driving. Going out for a drink is not enough. It is much more important where you've gone out for that drink, etc., etc. These are not the kind of people that will call a radio station and speak the truth and tell the whole world, actually their neighbors, how badly they're doing. No! The problem with this is that it may be a bit difficult to realize just how bad things are. Because the Kenyan middle class is still desperately determined to keep up appearances, to show neighbors that they are surviving better than them. I think a better clue came out in the survey carried out in the Star newspaper, where people were asked if they're up to date with their rent. A staggering 56% were not up to date with their rent. In other words, wajalipa rent. And of course, most landlords don't want to know. And therefore there's intense pressure already from rent manenos, let alone food, which is the immediate emergency. And so it should not surprise anybody that incidences of domestic violence have dramatically increased. Middle-class marriages are the most shaky by far. That means before the virus, there were still problems. Those marriages were still vulnerable. Now with this virus manenos Yeah. The things that are happening. You know, we even have women who are walking away from their marriages. And many of them are leaving their children behind. And they're not going to their parents' place. They're not going to live alone. I think you get my drift. They are following the money. Yeah, and some of them are pretending that they're following their hearts. They're following true love. Whatever that means. But all we have said is not as important as what I'm about to say. And let me say it in a very brief sentence. Yeah. When you have a problem with the middle class, a problem as serious as the one we're facing right now, you're courting serious trouble. Politically, yeah, let me just leave it at that. Yeah, you can chew on it and digest it and realize what it is I'm saying. You know, all this is very sad because what has caused this entire problem is still a mystery. The virus is still a deep mystery in Kenya. In other places of the world, like the West, the US for instance, people have seen the virus and its devastating impact. They have seen sick people. They have seen people on ventilators. They have seen serious numbers. But in Africa and in Kenya, we still haven't seen those things. And I doubt whether we'll see them. And that is why the mystery this side of the world over the virus is even deeper. Because there are so many questions here that have no clear answers. Very basic questions. For instance, why test? Think about it. If you test somebody and they're positive, they'll go into quarantine. And when they come out of that quarantine, there's no guarantee that they'll not be reinfected. Let alone that, a person who tests negative today could test positive tomorrow. So why do the tests, unless you are able to do them daily on everybody? Because that person who tests negative today is positive tomorrow and spreading the virus, if we're to follow the reasoning that you're being given. So why waste resources testing healthy people, doing mass testing? Why? Is it to show high numbers of infections so that you scare people more? You know, I've been following trends very carefully the world over, and I'm now convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that this virus is intelligent. Do your own research, and you'll notice every time people want to come out of the lockdown, or somebody talks about people coming out of the lockdown, infections dramatically increase. In some parts of the world, deaths from the virus dramatically, suddenly increase. If it had happened only once or twice, then you'd say it's coincidence. But it happens every single time. Recently, President Uhuru Kenyatta spoke about relaxing restrictions coming out of the curfew. And then suddenly, pop! The number of infections dramatically shoots up. And this trend is evident around the world. But even after this so-called pandemic ends, there are questions which must be answered. The people must demand answers to some questions. Top on the list is the simple question: why did people rush into lockdowns without considering the very obvious other consequences that are clearly much more deadly than any pandemic? If you put together all the casualties from domestic violence, increased criminal activity, sickness as a result of lowered immune systems, as a result of lockdowns, children being abused at home by frustrated adults who are out of a job, who no longer have an income, hunger and shortage of food, etc., etc. When you put together all those casualties and try to compare them to the casualties from the so-called pandemic, the numbers are much, much higher from the consequences, much higher than from the disease, which you're trying to protect people from. And so, it will be very important that we get an answer as to why that decision was taken, despite the very obvious consequences which people knew would come about. And another question that needs to be answered is why, despite the fact that we're being told all this is scientific procedures were not followed. You know, the people doing mass testing are wearing the same outfit as they test positive and negative people. And we are told this thing is so infectious that people have to be buried at night with the surrounding people fully protected. And yet the people doing the testing are wearing the same outfit, test after test after test. Does that make sense to you? And there are so many other blatant contradictions. But I'm not here to cry over spilt milk. So we need to focus on the consequences which we are now facing. And the worst news of all is that even if the lockdowns are lifted today or yesterday, or restrictions removed last week, it will take a very, very long time for economies to recover, for people to recover. And of course, some of the consequences, some of the scars, like abused children, those kind of consequences you never, ever recover from. You take them with you to the grave. And all this for what? Especially in Africa, where Almighty God has been good. Oh boy. Oh boy. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.